Hey everyone, welcome back to another weekly review video. This is going over the week 17 review, so that was over your assignments from January 20th through January 26th. And if you remember, this was focusing around the executive branch. So starting off, we kind of looked at what the executive branch is. You guys mainly focused on the president, but the executive branch consists of the president, the vice president, the cabinet, executive departments, independent agencies, and other boards, commissions, and committees. So starting off, you know who the president is and the vice president. But the cabinet is that group of advisors to the president. So that's people such as the Attorney General, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, or the Secretary of Transportation. They're just people that advise the president on issues surrounding what they're in charge of. And then next, the executive department, those are actually those agencies that those members are in charge of. So, such as the Department of Transportation, that would be the Secretary of Transportation in charge of that. So those are just what those departments are. After that, we've got independent agencies. So independent agencies are a lot of what we see like in our own everyday lives. Things such as the Federal Reserve and the United States Post Office. Those are all underneath the executive branch. And then lastly, boards, commissions, and committees. Those are just smaller agencies that carry out really specific roles that do not fall under those executive departments that you see the cabinet members in charge of. So that's the executive branch. Like I said, we focused a lot on the president, which was a super cool introduction to the unit because we got to watch the inauguration on the 20th. So right as we were starting talking about the president, we got to see a new one sworn in our country. So the first thing we looked at was the powers of the president, and we looked at their constitutional powers. So starting off strong, their main power is the execution and enforcement of laws. If you think about it, the executive branch execute. They execute those laws. They make sure they're being followed. They don't actually pass the laws. That is the legislative branch's job. If you remember back from our units on the legislative branch, their job is just to make sure it's being enforced. They also have the power of appointments. So like I discussed about those cabinet members, they have the power to appoint the people who are in charge of those agencies, appoint the people to that cabinet position. They also have the ability to appoint federal judges to federal courts. Another power they have the power to sign in legislation or veto legislation. They don't write the bills. They don't, debate on the bills or anything like that. That is all the legislative jobs. But the last step in passing a bill into a law is sending it to the president. And the president either gets to say, yep, I agree with what Congress passed and sign it in, or the president gets to, in turn, say, I don't agree with this bill. I don't want it to become a law. And that's called a veto. So that's one of the powers they have. And it's really a check to make sure that Congress is not passing things that necessarily just their agenda, just the things they want to get passed. They have to run it by the executive branch. But another check is if the president vetoes it, Congress can come back with a 2/3 vote and override that veto. The president is also in charge of diplomacy. So this is their relations with other nations. You see the president go overseas a lot. They also receive a lot of ambassadors or other world leaders. So they meet together and to discuss just, the working and relation between the United States and other countries. And a big part of this is the president is also in charge of signing treaties. If there's any other conflict between nations that we want to stop, or if we just want to create, strong allies between other nations, we'll sign treaties, and the president is in charge of doing that. And then lastly, the president is given the power to give the State of the Union address. So that is an address that happens every year except for the year the president is inaugurated, except for inauguration years. That is when the president will address the legislative branch and say, this is what we want to get done this year. It happens right at the beginning of the year and be like, this is our agenda, this is what we want to do, this is what I want to do. And it's just kind of outline how they want to see the year go. That's one of their big ceremonial powers. But yeah. We also looked at the roles of the president. So the president is many different roles in our country. They have ceremonial roles. They have roles in government. They've got a lot of different things that they do. So starting off, our president is our chief diplomat. Our president is the person who goes overseas and meets with other, like I said, other nations' leaders. They sign treaties. They're just in charge of really making those connections and representing the United States in them. They're also our commander-in-chief. The president is the commander of our armed forces. They are in charge of deciding where they move, when they move, that sort of thing. It is important to remember, though, the president can't actually declare war. The president can just decide where to send troops. Our president is also our chief of state. So this means that they are the ceremonial head of our country. So it's a big difference because if you think about Great Britain. Great Britain has got the Queen, who is like their ceremonial figurehead. You know, when you think of Great Britain, you think of the Queen. But then they've got the Prime Minister, who is in charge of all government, who's the head of the government. Our president is actually both of those things. They're the person that represents the United States. They kind of unify us together, but they're also in charge of the government. So chief of state is that unification, the ceremonial head that our president is. The president is also the chief administrator. So the government kind of runs like, as described as like a business, you know, there's a lot of different roles to oversee, a lot of different jobs, and the president is in charge of overseeing those, kind of works as the head of the administration. He's the chief administrator. The president is also the chief executive. He is in charge of the executive branch of the United States. You looked at all of those positions, the vice president, the cabinet members, the independent agency, all of those things, the president is the head of them. The president's on top and kind of oversees all those positions. And then lastly, the president is the chief legislator. So this is where I go back when we discussed how the president gives the State of the Union address to Congress. The president kind of influences Congress on what they think should be passed. You know, the president has a lot of agendas that they discuss and talk about and get public support behind. So then the president goes to Congress and kind of wants to influence them on what kind of bills and laws that they should be passing. This does not mean that the president actually writes up any bills or passes any bills. It just means that the president influences those bills, influences Congress to get to work on certain bills, certain public policies. And then lastly, we're looking at the limitations of the president. So the first thing is that while the president gets to enforce laws, it's Congress who passes those laws. So Congress kind of gets to decide, you know, what laws are going into effect in our society, and then it's the president's job to enforce them. It's to make sure they don't get too powerful for the president to be able to write them. That's Congress's job. Another limitation is Congress has the ability to impeach the president. We've seen this quite a bit in our society lately, with Congress's ability to impeach the president. So that would mean that the Congress, starting with the House, gets to charge the president with impeachment, which would be a formal charge of charging them with some sort of crime. And then they go to trial in the Senate, and if the Senate votes yes, then the president can be removed. We've never actually had a president removed from the position. However, it is a limitation that can be there in case the president does need to be removed. Another limitation is that Congress can override a president's veto with the 2/3 vote. So like I said, if the president doesn't think a bill should become a law, they can veto it. But then it returns back to Congress, and if Congress is like, no, this absolutely does need to be a bill, it can be cast to vote again, and if it gets a 2/3 vote, it overrides the president's veto. The next limitation is only Congress can declare war. So like I said, while the president is the commander-in-chief and can move the armed forces and send them places, they can't actually declare war against another nation. Only Congress can do that. And so that kind of is what makes those conflicts official, is a declaration of war, and the president does not have the ability to do that. Another limitation is the treaties that the president makes must be ratified by the Congress. So while, yes, the president works as our diplomat and works alongside and represents the interests of our nation, and then eventually signs the treaties, they do not actually go into effect until the Senate votes to ratify it, votes saying that that treaty is good. And then lastly, a limitation to the president is all appointment that the president make must also be approved by the Senate. So when the president puts somebody into a position, such as a federal judge or a cabinet member, then the Senate has to come behind and vote, yes, that person would be good in that position. If they vote no, the president then has to choose somebody else to put into that position. So as you can see, the president does have quite a few powers and responsibilities in our society. However, there's a lot of limitations on it to make sure that person doesn't become too powerful. Can't, only focus on their own agenda, has to make sure they continue to work for the good of the United States. Yes, so that was our introduction to the executive branch. If you have any questions, reach out, let us know. We're going to continue working on this a little bit more, look at some more current events. But if anything confused you or you need help with anything from last week or this upcoming week, reach out and let us know. Thanks.